Well, welcome back to the Cave of Science and another Running Scientist production. And today we're going to look at some tips for balancing chemical equations. First of all, a chemical equation is really broken down into two sides. On one side we have the reactants, and on the other side we have the products. Now when we do this, we want to make sure, and really the reason why we have to balance these chemical equations, we have the same number of atoms on each side of the equation for each element. So same number of atoms. On the reactant side, and the same number of atoms on the product side for each element. And the reason you do this is really a conservation of matter for each element here. As we know, we can't create matter, we can't destroy matter. We can recombine the atoms to form different compounds, but we just can't pull atoms out of thin air, and we just can't all of a sudden not show for where these atoms went to. So I'm going to give you some tips as we start balancing. The first thing we need to do is make sure all compounds are balanced for charges. So the compounds are, well, what I got here, are balanced for charges. And we've done this already, so balance for charges. So make sure they are balanced, or they're electrically neutral, as the case may be. Alright, if we're going to balance things, what we did for charges, we use subscripts. When we start balancing chemical equations, we can only use coefficients. So we can only use coefficients. You cannot use subscripts, you cannot use superscripts, you can only use coefficients. And those coefficients are distributed through each atom in that particular compound. And we'll go through some examples of that on the next video. Number 3, and again we're looking at hints. Balance free elements last. This is an uncombined element. So balance free elements last. It's easy to put a coefficient in front of a free element without really affecting any other atoms in a compound. So that's why we always like to use or balance the free elements last. It's kind of a good general rule to remember. Next, balance polyatomic ions. Balance polyatomic ions as a single unit. If that polyatomic ion shows up on each side of the equation, balance it as a single unit. And that's why I like to put my polyatomic ions, and we're going to use sulfate here, I like to put them in parentheses. It's much easier to balance this as a single unit than try to break this up into 1 sulfur and 4 oxygens. Another little hint, sometimes water, whose chemical formula is H2O, sometimes it works to write water as HOH. Many times you're going to see water on one side of the equation, and you might see this hydroxide ion on the other side. So sometimes it's easier just visually to write water as HOH. And lastly, It's really trial and error. The more you work with balancing equation, really the easier it becomes. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. You may put a coefficient on one side and realize, oh, I'm messing up some other compounds or elements on the other side of the equation, which is fine. So the next couple videos we're going to go in and actually balance some equations. So till next time, we will see you later.